Hey everybody, thank you so much for clicking on this video. This is the first of 6 videos where I break down basic lifts in the gym. Now I've made all of these videos before, but it's been about 3 or 4 years and I feel like I have more understanding, more education, and more experience to share. Now if you're watching these videos as they're released, I will be on vacation, so I won't be able to respond to the comments as quickly as possible. So to keep the algorithm on my side, please drop your favorite deadlift variation down in the comments below right now, and let's jump on into it. The main muscles recruited in the deadlift are the glutes, hamstrings, and lats. Now, depending on the variation you're working on, we can bias or recruit different muscles more than others. For example, a straight leg deadlift will recruit more hamstring than a conventional deadlift. This is because the hamstring crosses at both the hip and the knee. So if you flex or bend at each joint, the more slack there is on the hamstring. And this is the fun part of programming exercises. One small change can completely change the focus of the exercise. So now that we understand what the deadlift is working, let's talk about a few progressions. The first thing I like to do with people having issues with their deadlift is make sure that they can hinge. For this exercise, you'll set up with your feet about hip width apart and place either a dowel or a broom along your back. Keeping a flat back, you'll send the hips behind you to feel a big stretch through the hamstrings. If you move the hinge point, the dowel will come off your back. This is a great drill because there's an external cue giving you the immediate feedback. Once you've nailed this, I recommend going to the kettlebell deadlift. No. I prefer starting people with a kettlebell deadlift when we add weight because it's a pretty stable drill with a lot of control since you're starting with the weight on the floor. To set this up, we start directly on top of the bell with ankles in line with the bar, and this ensures that we're sending the weight back and really loading the legs. Once you're on top of the weight, we'll reach down for the bars and squeeze the armpits down. Another cue I like to use is break the bar in half. Essentially, we're trying to build tension through the back and core before standing up. Take a big inhale at the bottom and exhale as you push the floor down to stand. People will typically graduate out of this variation fairly quickly since we don't typically see wildly heavy kettlebells in most gyms. But again, I find this is a really efficient way to nail down the basic hinge pattern with weight. Next, we'll break down the Dumbbell RDL. I definitely think this is a more challenging deadlift variation, but I don't always use it as a progression from the kettlebell deadlift. It honestly just depends on the client's goals. To set this up, we'll place our feet about hip width apart and toes to the front, and the weights will start in the hands with an upright position. This is the biggest difference between an RDL and a conventional deadlift. One starts the weight from the floor, the other you're holding the weight the entire lift. Now once you've got your weights, we'll slide them down the legs as we send the hips back, finding a big stretch on the hamstrings. Once you can't go any further, which is typically right below the knees, we'll push the floor away to stand. Now if you want some heavy weight, I recommend using some type of barbell. There are 2 main variations, a straight bar and a trap bar. I personally find the straight bar a little bit harder because the weight is traveling in front of you, meaning it's easier to lose tension in the glutes and put it more in the low back. So with the trap bar, the weight travels along the side so your center of gravity stays right underneath you. The piece of equipment you choose should honestly come down to your goals and enjoyment, so try not to be overly influenced by what experts online say is the most optional and just choose the variation that you enjoy the most. So now that we've broken down a few different variations, let's talk about the top 3 mistakes I see while deadlifting. One of the biggest mistakes I see are people hinging from the low back rather than the hips. And this often occurs when we're trying to get more range of motion. So if we think about a deadlift, we're working through hip flexion and extension. Now the second our hips stop pushing back, that's it. That's your end range. Otherwise, that hinge point travels up to the low back. Not the end of the world. I'm not saying that you're going to throw your back out, but it's simply not the exercise we're trying to accomplish. To fix this, let's use an external cue of where the weights land on the legs. For most people, like I said earlier, it's going to be about right below the knees, and this is where I'd start, and then you can play with more range of motion once you feel the difference between your hip hinge and your low back hinge. The next mistake I see is the weight traveling away from the body. This can be a tension issue with keeping the lats engaged, but often it's fixed with a simple cue. For a kettlebell deadlift, think of placing the weight behind you. This is important because the further the weight comes away from the body, the more you have to compensate with your low back. Now for a dumbbell or barbell deadlift, I would recommend thinking of shaving your legs with the bar so it's staying right up against you. So again, we're keeping it more in the glutes and less in the low back. The last mistake I see is pretty nuanced, but it has to do with the angle of your shin. Too far forward and we're putting it more into the quads. Too far back, and we risk pulling on the sciatic nerve. Ideally, we want a neutral shin angle. Now, your shin angle is really going to depend on your own femur and tibia length, but a good rule of thumb is if you don't feel it in your glutes or hamstrings, your knees are probably too far forward. An easy fix here is by incorporating a bench. Set the bench up behind you so that when you hinge, you land in that perfect neutral shin angle. This is a great way, again, to use an external prop to teach your body some muscle memory. So I hope this video was helpful in terms of understanding your deadlift, perfecting it, and performing it in the gym. A huge shout out to Fitness Lounge in Astoria for letting us use their space, and of course, my husband Kevin for helping us film. Again, please interact with this video by sharing, commenting, liking, subscribing. I'm hoping our very fun but long vacation does not totally screw up if you ever see my videos again. So hopefully I will see you in the next one. So light. I don't think this bar weighs 45 pounds. Keep filming. Sorry.
I zoomed in on your butt.
Great. No, I just want some footage of how to dismount this.